to Retech, and today we're going to talk about the Commodore 64. Now you can see we've got two 64s here, and that's for just a bit of a comparison because this is an eBay purchase, the one you see here, not the one that's running at the moment. This is my original 64 that I've used for basically just about everything time and time again, and it's been 100% reliable. But this machine is a purchase that I've recently made from eBay, and it was because it was listed with an ARM SID chip which was already on the board. Now I was going to try and get hold of one of these SID chips anyway, the ARM SID, just to do a comparison and just to find out really were they any good. But you know, this machine came along and it was described as being in very good condition. It was described as being rebuilt. It was described as being recapped and also cleaned, serviced, and virtually immaculate, well, according to the blurb on the advert. So I thought, well, there's a bit of a delay and a bit of a waiting time to get hold of ARM SIDs anyway, so I thought I'd get hold of this and used the chip as a little bit of a test bed to find out what they were all about, and to, you know, put together a little video on the differences between various SID chip replacements. So this machine arrived, and with all things on eBay, it's a bit of a cautionary tale. You see, because as with all things now, that kind of what somebody might term as really good condition could be somebody else's excellent, and somebody's excellent condition could be somebody's poor, and somebody's poor condition could be somebody's really good condition, and it's all kind of depends on where you're coming from when you're advertising something for sale. Well, this one again was meant to have been refurbished, so when you have a look at it in comparison to my other one, you can see that there's not really a lot of difference in colour, but there's a lot of difference in texture, because this one's very smooth. It's lost its texture along the front just from kind of an aesthetic point of view. The keyboard is yellowed on its legends, where this one's nice and bright, it's white. And you've also got texture on the case and keyboard, which is missing on this one. But that's not really the kind of be-all and end-all really, because however scruffy this machine appears to be, that can all be resolved. It's what it's meant to do and what the internals are meant to be like. So we're going to have a quick look at the inside of the machine. But you know, when you get something that's meant to be in really good condition, immaculate, restored as this one was meant to have been, well, you don't expect to be able to lift the back of the case up when it's screwed together, which kind of doesn't bode well really when you kind of think about what a restored machine should be. So I'm going to take the screws out the front, and we're going to lift the case off and just see if it was just misplaced when it was put together, or if there's something else wrong with it. And we're going to take a look at the inside of the machine. Okay, that's not really an inspiring start because there's only one screw in the case. So let's get the lid off and find out what it's really like. Okay, so it has been kind of cleaned. It is very clean inside, but I wouldn't have really left this old tape on here if I was restoring a machine. I think I would have replaced that anyway. Same with this large PC which holds the cables for the keyboard in. But it is clean. I'll give them that. It is clean inside. But looking at the case, you will see it's very mottled, very faded, very worn. And you know, there's not really a lot you can do about the aging of a case unless you retro bright it, but this feels a little bit too brittle to want to retro bright the case. Now the other thing you might notice is there's white on the standoffs for the case where it screws together. Now they've been glued on because the actual posts have been snapped off at one time or another. Now, depending on what you call restored, I mean, it's repaired, but it's definitely really not restored. I mean, it's a good, decent job of it. It does work and it does fit, and it did go together quite neatly at the front. So, you know, it's not, again, it's not the be-all and end-all of everything. But it's not too bad. But the only thing is, if he's had the keyboard apart, he's actually swapped around a few of the keys, so they're actually back to front, but we'll deal with that later on. Now, a quick glance over the board, you'll see that the machine has an ARM SID in place, which is a good thing. The processor has a heatsink on it, which is another good thing, and it generally is quite tidy. It's not covered in dust, it's not scruffy, it's been blown out with an air duster at least. And we're going to do a quick close-up of the board just to show you the condition of it so you know exactly what's going on. So okay, I'm going to use a little handheld camera here just to show you what the board's actually like. So we have the CPU, which has a heatsink. The cage on here looks like it's possibly intact. It, you know, looks like it may have never been taken off, and also it's had no real repairs to the memory, so it looks quite a tidy board. And then there's the ARM SID itself, so again, it's quite decent, it's quite tidy. It looks like it has had a little bit of care and attention. It's been recapped in a few places. Not everything's been done, but it has had some fairly new capacitors put on this board, so which is a good thing. So far, yeah, kind of, you know, marks out of 10, it's kind of about a 6, really, because it has had some work on it, but it hasn't been completely restored as it was stated in the advert. But, you know, there's some nice touches on it. So it's not a bad thing so far. It's had a little bit of work done to it. It's had a few capacitors replaced. It's been blown out with a can of air, or, you know, dusted out. The keyboard's been cleaned, the underside of the case has been cleaned, but we have broken standoffs. And the other thing that I found is the reason it's not closing is because we have broken latches on the back of the case. So it's not unusual because they get brittle, but again, you know, for a machine that's meant to have been restored, it's not a really good start. You know, he's gone to the kind of effort of putting little white tabs, plastic tabs on here so it locks at the front. Could have done something very similar at the back, but again, really it depends on what somebody's definition of restored is. Now, mine's slightly different to this by the sound of it, but you know, it's one of those things. It's kind of what people think is restored in comparison to what you expect to have been restored. And kind of moving on to expectations, as I said, it's not too bad. I mean, it has had some work done on it, but also the power supply was meant to have been restored. This power supply here. Now, you can see it's had marks from where it was taped together, and also there's a massive crack here, and you can push the case in. To me, that's unsafe. That's a power supply that shouldn't really be used, because it's damaged. It's not really electrically safe. You know, if I put this through like a UK pat test, it would fail instantly. And you know, if you really are letting this being used by other people or children, etc., or you value your own kind of life, then really I wouldn't be expected to use something with a crack in the case like that. So that's not a good start. Now, looking around it, it has a chunk taken out of the case here, and also it's got tape and glue on top of the tape. So I'm guessing it has been apart at some time, but not very well put together, and it's meant to work, which it kind of does to a point. This power supply will go on for a few minutes before it starts getting very noisy. It starts to tick, which means the transformer inside is on its way out. Even though the voltages are fairly consistent at the moment, it's not going to be long before this blows up your nice classic machine. Which, to be honest, if you've got a good classic computer that you spent a lot of time and effort on it, you really wouldn't want to be using this with it, or any other machine that this power supply could be used for. And it's not a good thing. So this is going to be consigned to the bin just basically because it's unsafe. And again, that's one definition, or one person's definition, of having something restored. It's not what most people would kind of say has been restored. Repaired kind of badly, but not restored. So cosmetically, it's kind of cosmetically challenged, but it can be sorted at the moment, because these machines are starting to become quite rare in working condition. I know there was millions made, but as they age, they're getting harder and harder to find them working. And this is kind of case in point, because it has been repaired, it has had somebody had a look at it, but it's not immaculate. It's decades old, so you know, unless you're really going to spend that amount of time and effort in making this machine immaculate, then it's never going to be that way. And someone who spent some time replacing the capacitors on here would probably consider it being restored, which sort of repaired, I'd say, but not restored. But this is an issue you're going to come up against time and time again, because as these machines age, the plastics, the keyboards, the power supplies are generally going to be harder to find in working or in good cosmetic condition. And people's expectations of what's going to be restored and what isn't is kind of going to lower a little bit on the bar, because if it works, it's going to have extra value than something that's just a static display piece. And as you can see through looking through listings and on online auctions, etc., you'll find that a lot of these machines now are being sold untested, or being sold as basically a static piece, you know, buyer beware. And that's because probably 50% or more of all the machines that are out there now don't work, and do need a lot of work to put them back into working condition. So what we're going to do now is we're going to turn this machine on, because I'm interested in how it sounds and how it works, because again, it's meant to have had quite a lot of work done to it. So I'm going to button the case back up. I'm going to swap over the cables from this machine, which is my trusty old machine, and we're going to use the same power supply that I know this machine has been working on for a long time, because it's a good unit. I'm not trusting that broken power supply that came with the machine, but I'm lucky enough in some ways to have a spare or spares in the forms of power supply. So really, the broken power supply to me wasn't a deal breaker, and it wouldn't have been even if it was advertised with a faulty power supply unit. So let's take a look at the machine working. Okay, so I've swapped over the power supply and the video cable, and it's using composite, and as you can see, it's got a decently clear picture even on this quite large TV, because at the time you wouldn't have a TV this large with a Commodore 64. You'd have a small portable or a small monitor, and it's not bad. There's kind of very faint bars on there, as you can see going down here, but overall it's not a bad picture. It's quite decent, and that's a good sign. And there's no hissing coming from the speakers, which it would indicate a capacitor that's starting to fail, or in this case a power supply that's starting to fail, because I'm using my known good one anyway, so that's a good start. And looking at the case, as I say, it's kind of a lighter brown, but it's not very consistent, and it's less of a brown than my original one. You see, I'm not really that worried about it being slightly brown in comparison to its original slightly lighter colour, because these did change colour anyway from new. You'd have different shades of greyish or brown, as some people might call it, and some shades were darker or lighter than others. So you're very rarely going to find from two different models that maybe were made in two separate countries that they're going to be exactly the same, because they even use different cases. Some used an earlier VIC-20 style case, and some used the later case which was used on some of the Commodore 64s, etc. And then the 64G used a earlier VIC-20 style case as well, even though they were meant to be all identical. So the cost-cutting measures from Commodore were rife all the way through its kind of range and model era. So the slight differences in colour and the fact that this one's fairly uneven all the way through and scruffy really wouldn't make a lot of difference. If I wanted to, I could get this changed. You could retrobride it, or you can just clean it and polish it back to its close as or near enough its original colour if you really wanted to. But sometimes it's nice to leave them where they've aged and they've shown a little bit of age, rather than over restoring the plastics themselves. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to load in a game which would show off the SID chip, or the ARM SID on this computer as well, and it would also be a bit of a test for the machine, just to make sure that everything's the way it should be. So I'm just going to use a emulator tape drive, which is actually one of my favourites. Even then, they did it in a dark brown instead of a light brown when they made it, because every other Commodore's different. And we're just going to wait for the game to load. Sadly, you might be wondering why we're back at a basic power on screen, because halfway through the loading process we got this message, and this message usually because of a CPU error where the processor can't handle the instructions it was being asked to process, which is a bit odd, because this game here has been used on this particular drive on basically all of my 64s, and it's been functioning perfectly. So I know it's not the game itself. I do know for the sound instructions that are on this game are fairly complex, but again, there's been millions of Commodores over the years running this game of Monty on the Run without any problem, so it's not the coding or the game itself. So I have a suspicion it's not the processor either, because it was running fine on the other machines, and this processor seems to be stable and it runs some less complex games fine, such as Hang On and a few other games that I've tried on this machine, but they are of the less complex variety. So I'm going to take the case off and I'm going to have a look at the board, and I'm going to replace what I believe is the issue. Now, I believe the issue could be related to the SID chip, or the ARM SID. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace it with an original SID chip, and then we're going to see if it changes anything on this board. Now, I really don't believe it's the processor, so I'm going to pop this chip into here, and then we're going to start again with the machine. Okay, so now we have the original SID chip in this board, and we're going to try this game again. So same game, same file, and we're going to use the same drive, and we're just going to start the game loading again. Okay, so as you can see, we're back to the too complex screen, so it's not the SID chip, which I'm quite glad about because I've heard good things about the ARM SID, and I was kind of hoping it wasn't that, but I'm not convinced that it's the CPU. Originally on the VIC-20, the prior model to the 64, they had a VIC chip which handled everything basically. Now on these machines they split up the sound and the graphics. Okay, so the easiest way to show you that is to show you on a spare board. Now this is my test board. Okay, so basically the sound chip sits in here, and then you have this area which has the silver lid on the top with the RF shielding, and that mainly runs the display, or at the moment you can consider that to run the display because it splits up the tasks between two processors. Now these, when they start going bad, they cause quite a few random errors which sometimes you might think is a processor fault or a memory fault. Now if you're lucky enough to have a spare, which is I have here, then that's one of the first places that you should really be looking. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out the processor that's in this machine and replace it with this, which I know is a working unit, and then we're going to try it all over again. So we're going to take the lid back off of this machine, and we're going to swap that chip from one machine to another, or one board to another. Okay, so I've popped the chip into the machine now, and I'm just going to pop the lid on, and we'll power it back on, and we'll retry the same game yet again. I'm using this Monty on the Run as a baseline because I know what it sounds like, I know what it plays like, I know how it installs, and I also am quite familiar with the game itself, and that it needs quite a lot of resources on this machine to run, and everything has to be working perfectly for that game to run, mainly because of the sound, because it does poke a lot of registers, and it's one of the more intensive games that a Commodore 64 is going to run, mainly because of that tune, the music that's been put into the game. So let's try again and then see what happens. Okay, so let's find out if it works. Okay, as you can probably hear, it works, and it works really well by the looks of it. I'm just going to turn the volume down a little bit. It sounds great actually, and it's got an ARM SID in the machine. It's not a normal SID chip, it's not a Commodore SID chip, because a lot of them are dying now. And I'm just going to have a listen to it to see exactly what it sounds like. And you know, so far I can't tell any difference. I mean, you'd need side by side and then really pick into it to tell difference at the moment. So yeah, it works really well. So as you can see, kind of electronically wise, it wasn't far off of being a half decent machine. It did have a fault with that chip, which, you know, maybe it was. I'm going to give somebody the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it wasn't tested with something that uses complex sound. Maybe it wasn't tested with something that uses overly complex instructions and it's really hammering the processor as well, and every other chip on the board. Maybe he didn't realise he got some keys the wrong way around. Maybe he didn't realise that the case is fairly bad. Possibly. You know, I mean, judging by his other machines, I'm not so sure if he's had side-by-side comparisons, and, you know, it's kind of hard to judge whether something is decent or not. But the broken clips, the glued-in struts for the front of the case, the oxidization on the keyboard pins, the kind of general kind of grubbiness of the machine as well, it was never a good sign when you took it out of the box. You know, I think that we're going to start expecting more and more of this kind of sale on classic computers, because I expect that these classic computers are going to be harder and harder to find, and I expect working ones are going to be even more difficult to find. I mean, Bill Hurd said that he couldn't believe how long these machines would last, because really the expected lifespan was 5 to 10 years because of the components that we used inside the machines. Now these machines are between 3 and 6 times outside the life expectancy of what the designers had kind of picked for these machines, and there's a good reason for them. And there's a good reason why they are living longer than they ever thought they would survive out there being used. Because to get one good Commodore 64 running, most people have at least sacrificed parts from another. Okay, so whether you bought it off of eBay, in its past it's had parts basically donated from a dead or dying machine. Now, in the case of the Plus 4s, probably 70% of the machines no longer work. And you're looking at around about 30% of the machines are actually functional because of the 70% of machines which have been used to keep certain machines running. And, you know, that's the way it is. And it's going to get harder to keep these machines running. It's also going to get harder to find machines that haven't been cracked. The cases haven't been broken. The cases haven't had bits snapped off them. They're going to find it harder to find that keys have got decent bounce, or, you know, they actually function the way they should do. They might turn on in the case of this, but then again it may have had an underlying issue. So, you know, I'm not going to go down too hard on the seller of this, but, you know, I think some people have got to be very careful with their wording, because really eBay and most auction sites have this: if it wasn't as described, then you're entitled to return the item and get a refund. Now, technically, anyone who bought this and who wasn't really, you know, either technically minded or didn't mind a challenge of putting these machines back together again, would probably have gone, what on earth? I want a refund, because it doesn't run the games that I thought it would run, or it keeps crashing and locking up, or it's just generally grubby, and I don't really want that even as a display item in my living room or my bedroom or whatever. And, you know, they're going to get returned. But I'm guessing, you know, it's going to be harder to find immaculate machines going forward. So yeah, I'm quite happy with it, really. I'm quite happy with the arm SID. We're going to look into that in the next episode. But yeah, it's working, and we're going to have an episode of restoring this, because I have too many, and I really don't want to keep on collecting hundreds of Commodore 64s, because that's going to entail a lot more work in keeping them running, when I can concentrate on keeping a handful of machines of the same type in perfect working order. So I hope you enjoyed this. It was a bit of a preamble about the pitfalls or not of buying from auction sites. So thanks for watching. I'll see you soon. Please subscribe, join me on Patreon if you wish to, and thanks again. See you later. Bye bye.